Good morning and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. We have a really nice session on migration scheduled for this morning. We have Dr. Claudette Crawford-Brown and Dr. Khadijah Williams and Mr. Brome and Omar Brown with us to share with students around the world their perspectives on migration. I want to be sure that I step out of the way as quickly as possible to give as much time as possible for interaction with the presenters and with the students who are live with us this morning. I also want to be sure that we thank video conferencing for global learning for enabling and supporting this effort, as well as Zoom for enabling the use of the platform and the technology to make this happen. And without further ado, Dr. Crawford-Brown, I am passing it over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am hoping that you can, I'm sharing my screen. So I'm hoping that everybody will be able to see my screen. I have just gotten word that Mr. Brown, who is based in New Hampshire, has been asked by his school to do some substitute teaching, so he may not be able to join us, but he certainly participated in the content of this session, and I will be representing his perspectives as best as I can. Okay, I was glad that I was able to talk to you, a couple of you, before we started. It's great to see your beautiful smiling faces. And as I look through and look around, I'm glad that I was able to capture what you look like before people closed off their videos. Okay, this morning I'm going to be talking about the socio-cultural context of Caribbean migration. And as you see, is everybody seeing? I just want to make sure that everybody is seeing the slide. Okay, as you see, the slide says there, what's the matter with the world? Has the world gone mad? The reality is that we are in the middle of course, a global pandemic. But as I speak to the issue, myself and Dr. Williams speak to the issue of migration and the sociocultural aspects of migration, we realize that the global pandemic is just one of the many crises facing us at this time. I'm sure Trinidadians, and whether in Africa, whether in London, persons in London and young people in London are dealing with Brexit. The young people in Trinidad are very aware of the role of migrants and refugees, and the issue of Venezuelan refugees coming into Trinidad and Tobago. We have on the southern border of the United States all sorts of things happening, as you've heard about caravans going from Guatemala and Honduras, etc. We have Venezuelans also going into Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao because of different push and pull factors. In Europe, there's some lots of stuff happening with migrants there, as North Africans and Syrians move because of war over to the Netherlands and Poland and the Eastern European countries. And so we have a lot going on. But I thought that I would begin today by talking about the sociocultural aspects of Caribbean migration, because it's one part of the world where things are happening. And if you understand you have to understand the nuances and the little differences about Caribbean migration and about migration in the different parts of the world in order to better understand how we are going to deal with these problems. So the purpose of this whole seminar is to help with global understanding, using and involving and having the participation of young people from all over the globe to see if we, in the middle of this pandemic, can better understand what are the forces that fuel migration. Maybe if we understand just a little bit about a little part of the world like the Caribbean, which are little tiny islands, we can better understand what's going on. So we have the global pandemic, we have Brexit, we have the Venezuelan refugee crisis, we have Central American refugee crisis, we have European migration, we have Central American migration. So let's start. Where in the world is Jamaica and the Caribbean? I thought, for the purposes of students who may not be from the Caribbean, to explain, just showing a map those who might be joining online through YouTube or looking at this later, we need to understand where we are. We are little stones in the big ocean called the world. And so Jamaica is, and Trinidad, you can hardly see countries like Trinidad. So I'm going to jump to indicate where we are and then show you now that all the little dots that you see represent actual countries. We are not just little dots on a map. We are people too. And there's a map of Jamaica, and showing most people know where Florida is. So I thought I would show the Caribbean in relation to where Florida is and Cuba is. And so coming right down from Florida, we see all of these little dots, this archipelago of islands coming from Jamaica to St. Martin, Haiti, and then we have St. Lucia, Antigua, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago is the island that's closest to South America there, and nearest to Venezuela. It was actually a part of the South American continent, okay? So now that we know where Jamaica is, what's the reality? The reality is that the Caribbean is the world's playground. We live where you guys vacation, and when I say you guys, I mean you guys outside of the Caribbean vacation. And so I am right now at on the north coast of Jamaica at a resort, and I just yesterday was talking to people who are here vacationing from Canada. They are here from all over the world, and even in the middle of the pandemic, some of them got through and did their COVID tests, and they're sitting on the beach right now enjoying this place which we call home. The reality though is that our countries are not just playgrounds. We are people too. Our countries have problems and social issues just like the rest of the world. And so the big question that I find a lot of people ask is, why would anybody migrate from paradise? And that's something that we can have conversations about. We have no wars which push people in other countries to migrate, like in North Africa, in Syria, there's a big war there. That's why it makes sense. And so a lot of people, when they see us in the countries of the North and the cities, they say, but why would you leave Jamaica to come to New York? Or why would you leave Jamaica to come to London or to Toronto? Because you don't have political persecution, we don't have wars. The reasons are basically economic, guys. And as you see from the slide here, we have the paradise and the cruise ships. Don't know when we're going to see those cruise ships again, but we have the realities that our economies are not able to sustain the livelihood of our peoples. And though we are happy with our country, most people don't want to leave Jamaica. The reality is that you see sometimes in the children, we have children who are working, you have child labor, you have a lot of violence that's affecting individuals, and you have a lot of economic problems, which are basically pushing people from the Caribbean to North America. So what happens is that I have a phenomenon that I've discovered and spoken about in my work called the barrel children of Jamaica and the Caribbean. It represents, I'm going to give you guys for homework to look at it under your NBC News, Claudia Crawford-Brown. You will see a video that explains what the barrel children are. But these are basically children waiting to rejoin their parents in the metropolitan north. And they basically are waiting maybe for 10, 20 years. The reality is though, guys, that our migration patterns are such that it has certain characteristics. One of them is that we have a situation where our people have to leave their children here in the Caribbean and leave them for long periods of time, sometimes 10, 15 years. Migration is not like it is in other countries or with the middle class of the Caribbean, where the whole family migrates together. We have something called serial migration. We have what we call bridging family members, where we have one person. It is, as we know, it's because it's tied to the labor market. It's money we're looking for jobs. So you have the Panama Canal earlier, then we had migration to the UK. And then guess what, guys? It changed. because migration to the UK changed where men were leaving, and suddenly we found in the 70s a lot of women were leaving. And so if you look at the pictures here, you see that in the 40s and 50s, we had our men leaving to go and help to rebuild the countries in the UK. But after the 70s, when those doors to England closed, guess what happened? People started migrating to the US and Canada. And what do you see here? We have a lot of women who are migrating because they are nurses, people coming here and taking our nurses out to the hospitals and say, please come over to North America and Canada. The nurses need the money, so they leave. And so you have a brain drain going. And the women who are also migrating include women who are taking care of children, babies, and elderly people. That is the factor I'm suggesting, ladies and gentlemen, which causes a difference in the Caribbean migration pattern. Because guess what happens? When mummies leave and mothers leave, because of the structure of our families, women play a very important role in our families. And when those women leave, we therefore face a different set of problems. And so I have something here called, there are various factors that I want to mention. One, the migration pattern has control factors, spatial factors, interpersonal factors, intrapersonal factors, and the thesis as put forward by Omar Brown, who was the other presenter, he speaks about differences in issues of family inclusion and family exclusion. So what happens? When the migrant leaves from Jamaica, there's lack of control. They don't leave because they want to leave today. They often have very long drawn out periods of time where the migration process takes 10, 15 years. So a mother may have to be separated from her child at age 3, and she doesn't see that child again until that child is 15. That's a lack of control. So the whole family doesn't go together. She often is separated by many, many years. And there's a breakdown in the family system where the relationship between the mother who's gone abroad and the child is very, very different. And the mother is not leaving because she wants to. The mother leaves because they have to, because of economic reasons. Spatial factors, the child is often moved and shifted to go live with an auntie in North America. Next, interpersonal, the auntie who they send them to may not get along with the child like in the way the parent looked after them. And there are often interpersonal factors. Then the intrapersonal now are those from my research where the inside of that child is different from child A, is different from child B. So we find children sometimes, unfortunately, getting depressed, suicidal. One child and another child says, oh, it's okay, my mom will come back in 10 years, and they're fine and they do well. Another child, because of their psychological makeup, may not do as well. So when they do come to your countries in London, or when they do migrate, guess what? They come with all of this, I don't want to call it baggage, but all of these factors are operating. The organic factors I'm talking about, adjustment to cold weather, climate, etc. Remember, in the Caribbean, we are a warm country, and you have to think about the psychological impact of somebody coming from a very warm country going to a suddenly cold country. Very few people do orientation programs. There was one in Connecticut where we did a new arrivals programs. Very many people don't do that. They just expect people to just adjust to the warm climate. The other thing mentioned by Mr. Omar Brown is the issue of differences in how families include each other. In the Caribbean, we are always in each other's pot. You have an auntie or you have a neighbor, and you come over and you eat at this person's house, and you go back and you go outside and you eat at another person's house, or somebody takes care of you and you call your mommy and say, oh, I'm having dinner here or there. That's a model of family inclusion. It's very inclusive. When those families or children do reunite with their parents abroad, they find families where there's a lot of exclusion, and the families they are pushed out. It is us and them. You are different from us, so you are a them. Okay, so those are some of the major things. I want to move on to look at, therefore, what does this mean, and what does this mean for our adjustment? What does this mean for our ability of our children to in terms of their behavior. And I just want to jump on this before I hand over to Dr. Williams. Children of migration tend to have emotional and behavioral problems, and they are manifested by over-sexualization. They'll be separated from parents and not being properly monitored, etc. And they don't do well at school academically. And they think they're going to America, so they don't need to have to study. And their work falls behind. And for years and years and years, they're waiting, sometimes 10, 15 years to join that parent. And because of that, we call it what I call, they go through betrayal trauma. What I call it, betrayal trauma. Okay, so those are some of the main issues. I am going to just end now with the looking at the parental factors and suggest a couple of cases. I'll talk about that later, that we have to do telecounseling, as suggestions for what to do. We have to keep in touch with kids, and I'm suggesting telecounseling be used. I'm suggesting that is at the micro level. At the METSA level, we're going to have after-school programs to support those children. And at the macro level, I'm suggesting that remittance agencies have little kiosks that would allow us in the technology to link parents and children in a way that we do that at Christmas time. But I'm suggesting that this be an ongoing thing that we link with our therapeutic agencies, and that we try to see if we can get through to our children that way. That's about it for the time being. If we have time afterwards, I will read a little poem to you that was written by a parent called Under the Same Sun and Moon. And I'll show you some of the strategies later on that we're using to try to use books and stories and poems, etc., to help children to express themselves, because nobody ever listens to these children. And I'm suggesting that they should have a voice in what happens to them before they even go to the to migrate to the metropolitan north. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to hand over to Dr. Williams, who will talk a bit about some of the real life case studies of what happens to these children who leave from the Caribbean and who go over to North America, United Kingdom, Europe. How do they do, and how do the issues that I have brought up, the separation, etc., affect these children when they do land in this what is really a strange country?
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown.
Over to you, Dr. Williams, and thank you all very much for listening.
Yes, thank you. And so the following case studies, and Mr. Brome and myself, we will present 2 case studies that highlight the impact of migration on Caribbean nationals. And it's really in a way that is really very rare that we really confront these issues. So it's a rare consideration because it focuses particularly on the macro issues, the systemic issues that affect our migrant children and families. They are particularly interesting because they involve children who were sentenced to life imprisonment in the American penal system. And there are only 2 presented today, but as Mr. Brome can tell you, there are a couple thousands in the system, not all from the Caribbean, but a very high percentage being represented by the Caribbean. The first case is drawn from a public record, which Mr. Brome will share the link with you. And the other is from a personal diary of a fellow inmate who, on the passing of his fellow inmate, he promised that he would want to highlight these issues so that his fellow Caribbean nationals do not have to go through these experiences. The cases demonstrate the powerful relationship between the private and the public issues, as C. Wright Mills proffers, how important it is for us to see how what all that Dr. Brown just spoke about, the private, interpsychic, personal issues are connected to public issues, to policies and systems and structures. And in this regard, you may find the narrative similar to what you're accustomed hearing at school. So in Trinidad and Tobago, I was a guidance officer, a school social worker, family case worker. Many times the students will come to me, and what you will find is that the issues presented in these international cases were very similar in the school setting. Parent migrated, child started to become deviant, therefore goes to the principal office, sent to the guidance officer. And then I found a whole lot of the connection similar to what Dr. Brown highlighted. And for me, I have always wanted to focus and have started my quest in looking at those systemic and structural issues that affect children that are so often blamed for being all sorts of labels: juvenile delinquent, deviant, all the labels we love to give children, and sometimes not understanding those ecological issues. So you're encouraged in this presentation to think about the political, economic forces that influence social institutions, such as families, and the outcomes for children. Some recommendations for improvements are provided, and you are also encouraged to think a bit more about what can be done. So I want to hand over now to Mr. Brome, who is going to help us as he has been a legal aid within the penal system, doing research, and has a wealth of knowledge and experience in these areas. So he's sharing the cases. Over to you, Mr. Brome.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for coming. Of the two cases that we were looking at, the first one is his name particularly is Winston McPherson, and it's a public case that's available within the U.S. justice system, particularly in the level of the federal courts. He, like Dr. Brown had discussed and mentioned, he was what is considered what's a barrel kid, where his mother left from Jamaica while he was at a young age, and he stayed there with his grandparents, and he grew up there without her for a number of years. It was sometime after that he emigrated over to the United States. And pretty much, as Dr. Brown explained, there were all sorts of behavioral issues that occurred. So as a result, these behavioral issues brought him into trouble with the authorities, and he ended up being incarcerated and receiving a sentence of life imprisonment, which means, depending on where you're at in the country, you will never get out of jail. There is no parole, no release, or anything like that. So something interesting happened. McPherson ended up finding out about what is called the Vienna Convention, and it particularly provides rights for immigrants or foreign nationals that are in other countries and they tend to get into trouble. This particular right, it provides you with the right to contact your consulate or your nation's embassy. Wherever you are from, there's an embassy that represents your country. And what was interesting is most people don't even know, when they travel abroad, where their embassy is. They never look for it, they never find out the address, and they never worry about it, unless there's some issue of trouble, and then they gotta go run where the embassy is. So along with this, the issue that came up was that he had a right upon arrest to call and be represented by his consular. The consular is he's like the embassy attorney. He can come in and he can say, oh, don't talk to my client, blah, 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 blah. You go over there, what are you asking him? And he can intercede and they can solve problems for this. But unfortunately, this isn't well known. This isn't even advocated. So he ended up challenging it in federal courts after he learned that the law existed. And the courts came back with a unique answer. because this had been years after his conviction. I believe it was about 23 years after his conviction that he finally learned about this. He's a grown man at this point. So it took him about 5 years of litigating and everything. And the case site that I have will take you to the court's opinion. And in a nutshell, they dress it up that, well, pretty much you're right. There is the Vienna Convention. It was adopted May 22nd of 1969. The US signed on to it in 1970. But you didn't say anything about it when you were arrested. So you snooze, you lose. And this brought up a very interesting question. Which do we have? Which supersedes? Do we have human rights that supersede, or do we have procedural rights that supersede? And by that, I mean human rights that you are naturally given, that you are entitled to, these things that everyone should respect. And procedural rights where the courts have their rules that nothing will make them change from. And what the courts was saying was that because you didn't advocate that right, you can't claim it now. Because you didn't say anything about it, you can't argue about it. So in essence, a procedural right is what McPherson encountered. This is what's called a time bar. And it prevented him and locked him out of the courts from being able to address it and raise it or even get any type of relief from it. And so this brought about the issue of the lack of knowledge that a lot of these migrants have, that they don't understand how the policies are coming into play, what rights they do have, and it even goes as far as they tend to assume that they should have some rights when they really don't because of some type of bar or some type of system. Now, the second problem is that, unfortunately, a lot of the embassies aren't able, especially in poorer countries, aren't able to address the growing number of migrants within the penal system within the United States. They don't have the resources. So again, you're losing out on rights that you are entitled to. So we started looking at how could the system support him? How did it not support him, I should say? Where did it fail at? Where did the things go wrong at? And we see that was one of the key points, that the person doesn't know their rights. They don't know they have a right to contact the embassy and have a consular represent. And normally those embassies don't have the resources in order to help defend these individuals. So we also were worried about, we also wondered about the ideal of the effect of this, because now without the knowledge, when you are a migrant, how do you get from the place of where they can just put you into a corner and say, oh, well, you're a migrant, we don't care, to being heard? It's a critical question that we need to answer. So it's something that we'd like you to look at, something that we'd like you to investigate and figure out, what is the difference? What rights are you entitled to as a migrant? And we'll get further into that. But the second case, we have a little video for you, which pretty much gives an idea of a similar migrant case, but with a different situation that was involved. We altered the name just to protect the rights of the individual, but it explains the general ideal of what migrants face, the complications that they are now coming into when dealing with migration and the issues that aren't discussed on a broader scale. Can we cue the video? All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Carver. But as everyone's seen, Gabriel, he was another Barrow kid, and he encountered a lot of hurdles as he emigrated to the United States. And it went into a number of areas, everything from, just the simple peer pressure, teasing, and it exacerbated mental health issues that he didn't know he had, and no one in his family recognized either. So this brings up a different set of questions. As Dr. Brown had started to explain, there are a lot of little things that occur as a result of moving from one place to another, from the place that you know, the place that you're comfortable, the place that you grow up in, to an entirely new environment that has different circumstances, different rules, and an entirely different culture that you have to adapt to. So these took a definitive effect on him, and they continue to manifest, but unfortunately, because of stigmas, because of the way that we look at issues as far as mental health, we really didn't pay attention to it. We didn't notice the stress factors that he took on. We didn't recognize the burdens that he was carrying. We're thinking that, oh, you guys are kids, you go out and play and you run around and you're laughing and screaming and breaking stuff and you're fine. But we sometimes as adults miss those little things that may tell us that something more is going on. And that's what happened in Gabriel's case. So he unfortunately is not with us anymore, having succumbed to those little mental health issues. And it is devastating when you consider that in the recent years, there has been a significant rise in people discovering people that have mental health issues that have not been previously diagnosed. So we have to look at the isolation that he also experienced, because as his pathway went, he went from being a young man, being a child, growing up. He got involved in gang activity. He got involved in peer pressure. He dropped out of school. One thing after the other that started a path of negativity for him. And this eventually led and worsened his own condition. So once he was incarcerated, even there, it wasn't until later that they discovered that he was suffering from some mental health issues. And by then it was probably diagnosed too late. So we have to look at also how the system failed him. What did it do, or what didn't it do that would have provided some type of support for him? And why wasn't he diagnosed? Why wasn't these things recognized? And how often being a migrant of a lower class is overlooked and these issues ignored within it, not only just from external sources, but from within your own family, within the community. You know, we are so quick to just brush it off and say, oh, you'll get over that, you know, cheer up, you know, feel better. And we just wash it away for not realizing the impact that it may have. And this leads to a discrimination because of the stigma that we don't like to talk about it. And we have to embrace this. We have to look at it and make that connection and understand we are human, we have problems, and we have to find a way to deal with them, especially with you young guys, with the audience, with our kids. And we hope that our kids will find an even better way to deal with it if they are aware of it. If we can make you guys aware of it and you know about it and you can start recognizing the patterns and problems that people may face, you'll be able to better deal with it in the near future. So this is why we brought it up for you guys. We wanted to make you comfortable to talk about it and ask questions about it. And we hope that you will do that, because it can change everything for one person. Thank you. Dr. Williams?
Yes, thank you very much. And I send you a virtual hug. I see how connected you are to these cases, and I really want to thank you. I think we all felt it. Very important, again, the private issues connected to the public issues around policy and systemic discrimination, institutional oppressions, and so on. I want to share right now my slide just to summarize what Mr. Brome highlighted. And I will go now. Okay. Right. Okay, so I'm providing a synopsis, a summary of what was presented in the two cases. And we see in the two cases, parents needing to migrate to other countries because their country of origin is unable to provide for their needs. So that's one of the economic push factors. Primarily, people want a better life. They cannot get jobs. We even seeing it now in the pandemic. People are still, even though they're hearing different countries with the crises, they are opting to leave their homelands to go where they perceive greener pastures, and the economic push is there, and at the risk of losing your life, getting ill, and so on. We also see in the case studies the lack of knowledge of rights, human rights, basic human rights, supporting legislation for persons who have been in conflict with the law, your right to representation from your consulate, your embassy, the lack of parental support that could have helped these migrant parents instead of having to leave the young persons, the children, unattended, and then getting swayed into criminal activities, making poor decisions. They left a homeland where, in most cases, as you know, in the Caribbean, we have an extended family unit. You can go with mommy's not home, you go over to auntie, you go to the neighbor, you go somewhere, and somebody, another adult is supervising you. That was not there. Not even in a structured way to say, let us have some support networks for mothers who are going through this experience. So yes, the children were the sacrifice in those cases. We have the issues of stigma and discrimination, as Mr. Brome said. In the Caribbean, we don't want to know that we have a mental health problem. We don't want to go looking for help. I can tell you, even as a guidance officer, social worker in schools, students stigmatize the office. Miss, I'm not coming to you. The students will think that I'm crazy. You know, we had that. And on a global level, this is how it is impacting. So I want to help you to make the link, yeah, as it relates to migration. If you continue with that kind of misconception about taking care of your mental health, then we have discrimination and marginalization of migrants. These were both males who needed to develop their sense of identity and have some level of power. And we have Barry Chavans, who was Jamaican, who talked a lot about that and the identity of males and what it means to be a man. And we saw some of that coming into play with these cases. And again, the institutional and systemic discrimination, where the thoughts were that this is just a young Caribbean man, nothing is wrong with him. There wasn't attention paid in the system to the symptoms that he was showing, and therefore was misdiagnosed, not given the proper medication, his health collapsed. All right. So what can you do as young people who may be thinking about migrating? Yeah, or if you know someone who is migrating, it's important that you educate yourself. Stay the course of staying in school, get educated, yeah? Leave so that you can add value to another country if you must leave, Do not become a burden to another state. Develop a relevant market demand skill, which is linked to the first point of technical vocational skills. So you are not easily swayed into getting into criminal activities and so on. Being culturally sensitive, that's very important, and competent. Yes, understanding how different cultures behave. We have the Venezuelans coming in to Trinidad, and we are hearing a lot of talk about xenophobia and the misconceptions about Venezuelan women and girls. So a lot of things that are unfounded. And we fall into the trap of stereotyping and labeling persons. So let's try to be culturally sensitive. And what about you as a person in the receiving country? Again, the cultural sensitivity. Yeah, that is repeated. Be empathetic. Understand people are leaving. Nobody wants to leave a good home, isn't it so? We never want to run away from a happy home. So let's be empathetic, understand the situation, receive people with some care and support and so on. Understanding our fundamental human rights as persons, as the hosts, yeah? understand how, as I said before, we can avoid the stigma and discrimination and avoid contributing to oppression and marginalization of migrants. And these are points I would like to hear in our discussions, what's going through your head as we present these ideas to you. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. And as our last slide in the video indicated on these points here, what could you do to help a parent, a mother or father, stay in their country of origin instead of leaving, and which is contributing to a lot of the brain drain? Yeah? Do you know your rights as a human being, your right as a child? How could more positive outcomes be promoted for migrants? And how could you make migrant children feel more comfortable? I know we have a Guyanese student in the audience, and I'd love to hear you talk about your experience if you so wish. But this forum is for us to engage and learn from each other and see what we can do that is better so that we influence structures and systems. Yeah? And just in summing up, I want to say our presentation today highlighted issues of inequity and stigma and discrimination, incarceration of children. So you leave a country where we see child rights in a particular way. In the Caribbean, children, what we call children, are in conflict of the law. They are treated in a particular way. But we have seen in just a few countries that didn't sign on to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that there are still children who may end up in prison for life. What does that mean for you leaving with information when you're migrating? Mental health issues, nicely linked to the perspective of Dr. Crawford-Brown on her presentation, and how does it relate to the larger macro issues around healthcare and stigma and discrimination in institutions, yeah, and in society and communities at large, and the issues around parenting. What are the implications for us as professionals, as residents and citizens? Yeah. And, just as another side note, I want to say, students, even at your school, you need to be familiar that you have rights. The consular that Mr. Brome talked about for a migrant in another country, the person who represents that at your school is usually the guidance officer, who is the advocate for child rights. If you feel that some injustice was done, yeah? So at the school system on a micro level, yes, a replica of the wider society, we are actually putting systems in place to help you to survive in the global space, to understand the more macro issues, yeah? And it is important for you, though, to understand this. So I want to close here, and I would love to get feedback. Dr. Brown, we would love to engage with you because this is your segment now. Thanks again for having us.
There is so much embedded in your presentations. Thank you for pulling all this together for the benefit of all those who will be watching the video. I'm astounded at the thought and information shared with us about the dynamics of the real serious impacts throughout the structures of society and individuals on the life of a young person, from whenever that parent decides to leave to whenever they are reunited and subsequently. It's incredibly powerful, and I hope that those who are watching this appreciate the level of information and insight that is here for them to learn from it, and hopefully, ideally, as we designed, have an impact themselves in their own structures of their own lives and in the society around that. So before I take up too much time babbling, what we would like to do at this point is open it up for questions from the students and the teachers that are live with us this morning. So we have just not very many people, so I invite you as students to be judicious about opening your mic and go ahead and ask questions of our presenters.
Good afternoon. I am Osaze Meraldo. Earlier I heard you all saying I was the CARICOM ambassador. I am not. I'm just, a measly communications officer on the Caribbean Regional Youth Council. But I'm also the Guild Council at the UE, Kville Public Relations Officer. And well, I'm going up for re-election in the upcoming days. But I really enjoyed the discourse with respect to migration, especially since, I'm from Trinidad and I went to Kville in Barbados for university. The UE campus in Barbados is actually extremely diverse. It's one of the most diverse campuses, I dare say, in the world. And, we really have a lot of experience with different cultures and different regional perspectives. With respect to xenophobia, which one of the presenters mentioned, I can't remember exactly, I really think is a big thing in the Caribbean. And maybe more so the Powerpuff Girls, the big three, Trinidad, Barbados, and Jamaica. But everyone has this xenophobia that I think we need to deal with and tackle from a very young age, because it's sort of polarizing even amongst the campus. We separate ourselves and we don't have to. It's when you're watching and you see it happen, it's kind of annoying when you see that people pulling themselves apart when they really don't have to, and we could be working together. A lot of us in
about that. What's the question you want to frame around that?
I was just saying something before I left because I have an exam just now.
Okay, you're just making a commentary.
Okay. A brief comment, yeah. I could conclude though. I just want to say, I really enjoyed the presentation and I'm glad you all were having it.
I didn't mean to close you down. I was just wondering, when you said the three, I love the name Powerpuff Girls. Are you saying Trinidad, Barbados, and Jamaica are the three countries that stick out? What would you recommend as a leader from what you're saying now in the Caribbean and a young man who sees you his role, etc.? What would you recommend as a solution to some of the issues that we have brought up today?
I feel like I don't want to make the blanket statement and say education is the answer. But for most of the problems we have, it starts dealing with them starts with education, and from not tertiary education, but from young, from low levels, because from a foundational level. Because if you start later, even if we make everybody do Caribbean studies for keep, and we introduce like foundation courses like Caribbean civilizations in UE, it's at that point, you already went through primary school, secondary school without having this exposure to the rest of the region and the cultures.
Right. Okay. And so public education, you're talking about public education around the migration issues. This little book we just brought out, it hasn't been published yet. This little one about precious leaves for foreign. In the primary schools, you're saying we could start talking to children about what they will experience if they go to foreign. What are the emotions a child experiences? Talking to parents using that poetry, using music to educate them then. So it's public education, not just at UE, but at the community level and in the schools you're saying. Would you say primary schools or would you start with high school?
I would say primary school or even as early as possible. But the thing about education is, we can't just restrict it to these schools. We'd have to try to, seep into the media, try to get it children exposed, even, the things we have showing on television, the things we listening to on the radio, it has to be something that we expose to from young, because different countries have, different exposures to the rest of the region. I would say from my experience, Jamaicans don't have that much exposure to do with the rest of cultures. Trinidad as well don't have as much exposure to the rest of cultures. But then within the OECS, they would be exposed to each other's cultures, and they would have, that appreciation for each other more than per se, like, a Trinidadian would have for others or Bajan would have for others. So I think the exposure is necessary, and as well as the education, because I mean, you can't appreciate something that you don't know, even if you try or anything.
I think you're making a very important point, because I think Dr. Williams and Mr. Brome brought this out, that when the kids get to New York or to the US and they get into trouble or they get into bad company and they end up in the prisons, they come together as Caribbean people. And so what you're saying, Donovan, is very, very important, because we could start with educating people about migration, but you could start talking about each other's countries even. That's something that I was working on. I found when I went to Trinidad, the kids in Trinidad didn't know very much about Jamaica. And so knowing about ourselves and strengthening our selves, since this is a Trinidad Caribbean audience, strengthening our own knowledge, you're saying, Donovan, education about our region and why we have to leave and why parents leave their children and all of that could be conversations we could have. You're saying at the community level. Excellent.
I wanted to add to Dr. Brown, the point he raised. So he's really talking about the cultural competence and cultural sensitivity. And another thing that we do very well. Yes, and the cultural competence and competence. And the other thing that we do well in the Caribbean is that we may not know much about each other's context, but there are many stigmas and stereotypes that are very pervasive. And that tends to come out more. And having traveled throughout the Caribbean, I realize I have been a recipient of that myself. People will quicker tell you what this general notion is about a Trini, and sometimes going towards the negative rather than the positive. So yes, excellent point raised by Osaze. And I wanted to say Osaze is also in the performing arts. So he uses a lot of media. I think his mom sends me a lot of his music. He is using media to get his ideas across. So he's not only talking the talk, he's walking the walk. And I just wanted to use the forum to congratulate a young person like that who is doing what needs to be done. So congrats, Osaze. Really appreciate the input.
I absolutely, I loved his strengthening the message that it's education. And I would, as he's talking about that, my thought is it's not education at any one particular level. It's education throughout the lifespan, both in the country of origin, about the dynamics involved in what it means as a parent. What does it really mean? What are the risks of my departing to my children over time? If I know that better, that's one element of education. The education for somebody about what they will encounter in the host country. All of those different elements of education.
It's another level.
And then as Dr. One of the things I picked up from you, Dr. Williams, was the empathy. The empathy for all as we go forward with that. But Andrea, it looks to me like you have a question. I'm not sure, but I certainly want to give you a chance to chime in.
What a beautiful smile, Andrea.
So we went through the as you guys were explaining what is migrants, but my question is, okay, the thing for me, some people migrate for betterment, they leave their children behind, but what if they did not leave for betterment? What if they're doing it for, like, they get themselves in trouble and smuggling stuff into the country? How can we prevent that?
Okay, that's a very good question, Andrea, because you're saying we're talking about migration as typically trying to get betterment, but you have smugglers and you have people getting into drugs. I'd like to use the cases that Mr. Brome and Dr. Williams mentioned to suggest that I don't think that people very often deliberately, especially children, deliberately intend to get into drugs and crime. Very often they could be trafficked. Very often children who are caught up in this kind of scenario get into it, as Dr. Williams and I were talking about last night, through association with negative role models, or bad company, or bad friends, choice of friends. So they go to America or to England or to Canada with the objective of going to college. But because of the breakdown in the communication and issues in the family, they may feel neglected, or the parent doesn't pay enough attention. They get sucked into the gang culture, etc., because we want to focus on children. We don't want to focus on the cartels, etc. We want to focus on the Caribbean child who is coming in to America for the first time. What causes them to get into the drugs and into murder rap and all of that? Usually has to do with, we are seeing, psychosocial factors that happen from before they went to America in the Caribbean. And so if we could prevent some of those problems through counseling, through Uzaza's suggestion about using drama or media or music to educate people before they leave about the dangers and about the issues, and talk about it in schools and have conversations, maybe we could prevent them from getting into drugs. What do you think about that response, Andrea? Because it sounds like you want to make a point about another level of migration.
No, the thing is, as we were talking about betterment, it came to me as, so what if they didn't come for betterment, Like if they just leave the children behind just to get away, So in my mind, I'm like, parent is going through these things. What can we do to help the children or child out of the fact that their parents?
We have a break.
I didn't hear that last part.
Yeah.
What you want to take that, Dr. Williams?
Okay, she froze, but after she completes her statement, I'll make a point. Go ahead, Andrea. You froze and we didn't get the last part of your statement.
I was asking, what I was trying to say, what if these parents leave and they say, okay, I'm going for betterment and so on, they never send for their children. This time their children are at home going through this stuff and they don't care. What can we do for these children?
Okay, I'll respond after Dr. Williams. Or you want me
I think what I can say it and then you can take it, Dr. Brown. The point on some people who leave not with the betterment concept in mind. I am familiar as well with cases that women are being trafficked as well as their children. So the issues around human trafficking and child sex trafficking is another issue. So, but most times it is involuntary, Andrea. So your point is noted. There are many cases, and we have seen in recent research coming out of the Eastern Caribbean with the Venezuelan influx, the cases of women and children who are being sent by groups for the sex trafficking and child trafficking. So yes, your point is well noted. And again, it goes right back into, I'm going into the systemic issues around child protection policies in the country need to be more stringent, right? So that we can be able, and in addition to that, border control. When vessels are intercepted, the importance of putting children into safe places, treating women as victims, and so on. So yes, Andrea, there are some ideas, I'm putting them out, but we also have a part of this presentation where we would want to hear from you young people, having whet your appetite a bit and hearing all these wonderful things that we have coming out of our own research. What can you come up with as well? But yes, the point that I am raising is to your point is valid. There is the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, which involves women and children, and also the issues around the policies around child protection, border control and immigration policies, that we can be able to track and protect these vulnerable groups who are coming involuntarily into other countries. All right, Andrea, I see I have you thinking there. Yes, Dr. Brown, over to you.
I'd like to address another perspective that I see coming out of Andrea's question. She said, what about those mothers who is not that they're going for better, they just want to go and they leave the children and they never send for them? So I'd like to address that group of parents, because I see a passionate plea from Andrea for those children who she perceives as being left behind by parents, or they're never sent for. The reality is that from somebody who has done this research over 4 decades, is that the majority of parents want to send for their children, but they are stymied by the realities of immigration policy. Because remember now, the middle class and the upper classes of Trinidad, the Brownings and the middle class Black people of the Caribbean, the whole family goes together. We have what we call in the poorer classes serial migration, where I spoke about earlier. We have a bridging family member. The mother goes and takes the child over the bridge, one child at a time. And there's a little diagram that I have in a presentation where you show the mother straddling the bridge and the children crossing over the bridge. But the fact is that it takes 15 to 20 years sometimes for those immigration visas and all of that to come through. The person sometimes has to get legal, sometimes they go there illegally, and so sometimes they can't get the children over as fast as they want, and then there's a breakdown in the communication between the two. So the suggestion we are making is, Dr. Williams, Mr. Bourne and I, is that we set up structured mechanisms for communication to take place between the parent and child through what we call migration kiosks, or some kind of using the technology like Zoom, like this, where we would know in a structured way. Through the university, we have a migration studies unit, for example, and we're suggesting that everybody who would register with a central place, and they would be able to, the child would be able to communicate with us and say, I want to see my mother, I'm being abused. Or we would communicate with the mother in the metropole and say, listen, your child is going hungry, or your child is being sexually abused. You need to be able to communicate. And we would use Zoom, we would use large screen or small screen, or phones or whatever, to force or to structure regular communication between the parents and children. We are coming from the assumption that the parents don't basically want to leave the child and not send for them, but there are structural issues, whether it's through immigration, legal issues, police, law enforcement. Then they are illegally, they can't talk, they're working in American person's house, and they don't allow them to call their children, they don't know how to use the computer. All sorts of issues prevent that communication, and we know would facilitate the mother and the child, father and the child, to be able to communicate across the two countries. So that is how we would answer that question. We're assuming that the majority want to link with the child, and those who don't, we would encourage them or have the child put into foster care or some other mechanism set up for that child to make sure that child is properly cared for. We would follow up with it in the Caribbean. Does that answer your question, Andrea? Yes? Was that a yes? Okay.
I would also like to add, right? What you are saying is that the parent leaves with good intentions. But what I got from Andrea is the feeling of the child.
Right.
So the child feels abandoned. The child feels that the mother left them. So while you are looking at, okay, yes, the parent left with good intentions, that child that is waiting for 15 years
Yes.
feeling that that child has. That is what she's
Excellent
addressing.
point.
Because she
Excellent.
said, but they leave and they don't
They
want
don't
the
come back.
child. And that's no, they don't want the child. And that is the feeling of a child. That is what the child is
Yeah.
feeling. The child is feeling that the parent abandoned them. The
Yeah.
child is feeling that mommy she
Don't
leave me
want
with
to.
granny. And she
Right.
left me with granny and she don't care. And
Right.
granny she might be sending little remittance and whatnot, but for the child,
It's not right. That is why I wrote this book, because I have been working with children for 4 decades, and the children have a voice. And when they finally go, they don't connect with that mother. And I'm going to leave for homework for you. I'm going to leave and ask Renee to give you that a video done and orchestrated by me, which documents some of how these children feel, so that you can hear their voices talking about this. So this is a reality. They go through what we call betrayal trauma. So the parent has the good intention, as Mrs. Maldoboen says very correctly, but very often the child feels abandoned. And unless we address it, and I'm a clinician, so I'm talking about at the micro level now, I want to have much more support for the child's emotional and psychological needs in our Caribbean countries, so that they can cope at primary school up to adolescent, high school, through using, please remind me of the pronunciation, Okasu. Could you remind me of his name?
Osaze.
Please, the suggestions. Okaze,
Osaze.
suggestion, Osaze, that what we could
Osaze.
have, it will take me a little while, but I will get it soon. If we could find a way to link what he's doing at the community level through drama, through music, through after-school programs. This is something I've been doing with puppets. I have a Trinidadian puppeteer who has helped me to do puppetry, and we can have online YouTube videos which will speak to it. So this is the beginning of that process, to try to document and have in one place a resource for guidance counselors, social workers who can go to this resource on a YouTube channel where a child can see what resources they have and talk to somebody, know where they can go in each country to talk to somebody, and link to a central place where the children can get their voices out and also make links with their loved one who is perceived as having betrayed them, but who may have had the best intentions. So that's a very good point, Andrea. The reality of the child, how the child feels,
Yes.
versus the intention of the parent.
Yes.
Well, I am hesitant to close down this session, but we are about 20 minutes past our appointed time, and I don't want to impose any more on Dr. Crawford-Brown and Dr. Williams and Mr. Brome for their valuable time. But I would like to thank especially the students for joining in, and also, of course, our presenters for their time. And I am showing on screen now that the next 3 sessions with presenters. Next week, we have Mr. Henry and Dr. Esnard presenting. And then on March 16th, we have Dr. Brown coming back for us. And then on March 23rd, we have Dr. Passford presenting as well. So I hope more people will join in for those. We will share the recording from this session. And with that, I look forward to seeing all of you again next week, and in particular hope that we will energize students through these presentations to be with us on April 20th to do their own versions of what presenting their learning from this series. So thank you all very much for joining in today, and I look forward to continuing the discussion next week.
Okay, it was nice
Thank
meeting you all.
Thank you,
Thank
Bye,
everyone.
you.
everybody. Hoping to see you
Bye.
again. Let's continue talking, okay? Bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Great
Bye.
experience
Yes.
Thank you.
for us to talk together. Bye.